Welcome back to Detailed, an original podcast by RCAT. This is the show where we uncover lessons learned to help you navigate your next project. I'm Cherise Lakeside, Senior Spec Writer at RDH Building Science, and your host. My guest today, and I might say one of my absolute favorite interviews this year, is Mariam Issoufou, founder and principal at Mariam Issoufou Architects, with offices in New York, Niamey, Niger, and Zurich. Mariam Issoufou is an architect from Niger. She is the founder and principal of Mariam Issoufou Architects, a research-led architectural practice with offices in Niamey, New York, and Zurich. She is a full professor of architecture heritage and sustainability at ETH Zurich. The project we're talking about today is the Rolex Pavilion in Venice, Italy. Conceived as both an architectural gesture and a cultural offering, the 2025 Rolex Pavilion stands as an ode to sustainability, to Venice, and to the city's enduring relationship with the art of making. 200-year-old timber beams, salvaged from Venetian palazzi, are reimagined as the pavilion's walls, while locally crafted Venetian glass is formed into circular discs that compose the ceiling above. Glass extends to the ground plane as well, where terrazzo flooring incorporates recycled Murano glass shards as aggregate. Now, let's get into the details. Welcome back to Detailed. I am super excited. My guest today is Mariam Issoufou, founder and principal at Mariam Issoufou Architects with offices in New York, Niamey, Niger, and Zurich. Not sure I got all those right, but y'all can correct me if I didn't. The project we're talking about today is the very cool Rolex Pavilion in Venice, Italy. Beautiful place. I've actually been there. Mariam, thank you so much for joining me today on Detailed. How are you?
I'm well, and thank you so much for having me. It's such a
I
pleasure to have this conversation.
Well, I am excited to have you here as my guest. I'm sorry. I'm going to admit I'm prejudiced. When I can get a woman on the show, I'm even happier about it. Being still largely, there's a lot more women in architecture these days, but from when I started in the business, but always happy to get such an accomplished woman, as a matter of fact, on the show to
Thank you.
talk to. So I appreciate your time.
Thank you so
We
much.
we always start every episode with kind of an icebreaker question to warm us up and learn a little something about you before we
Mm,
get into the project. So I want to know. I've read your bio, and I'll read your bio later for the intro. Um, Tell me about one of your proudest achievements.
oh goodness. Um, I feel like I'm still trying to achieve, but yeah, I would say actually becoming an architect after having actually had a whole life and career in something entirely different. That was challenging, for sure. But then also, what made it much more challenging was deciding to start my firm, not in the US where I studied, but to start it directly in Niger in West Africa and headquartering it there. I would say that that was the most challenging, aspect of starting my career. And so, therefore, what I'm proudest of.
I can't even. You just don't like to be bored, do you? Again, I've read your bio, um, and you all will get to hear about that later. So let's talk about this project. This is a really unique thing. So let's start with a little background on this client and project. So who is client, and what is this all about? What were they looking to achieve?
So the client for this project is Rolex, and as you know, Rolex is the official sponsor of the Venice Architecture Biennale, and they were really interested in having a new pavilion in the Giardini area, like of the Biennale, and they, for the first time, decided to outsource that. Normally they develop their pavilions in house. And they decided to outsource it because they were interested in a pavilion that explored the idea and concepts around sustainability. And I've had a long-standing relationship with Rolex, going through different projects and programs they sponsor. And so we had a conversation where we discussed what it could be, what a sustainable pavilion could be, what I could imagine, how I could think through it. And it was just such a fruitful conversation on the onset because it started with the thought that sustainability is something that actually needs to be.
I love that because it's such a unique project. This is one of those probably once in a career type of projects to get to do something for this kind of event and this kind of very unique building. And those are the most fun to talk about because you may never
Absolutely.
get another chance to see one or to hear about it in the same way. So, before we get into specific details about the project, give me a broad description of the scope of this project. So, they've hired you. You've got to create this thing. What was the scope you came up with for this project?
I mean, the nice thing is that the pavilion is always in the same spot. There's only there's a platform that is there normally, and you have to basically make a pavilion that fits a certain predetermined footprint on top of this slab that is always there. So the boundaries were very clear, and it was kind of straightforward. And they were interested in having a series of exhibitions inside the pavilion. Um, I think my role at the beginning was mostly to design the pavilion, and they were going to take care of the exhibitions inside. But as we were working through the concept, they also decided that they wanted us to design the scenography also and design the full exhibition within to ensure that it was in symbiosis with the design of the pavilion itself.
So, the next question was what will this building be used for? And you mentioned exhibitions. So, what kind of
Yes.
exhibitions were inside this building?
It was one opportunity during the architecture biennale that Rolex always tried to seize is, and I was actually a recipient of that, is that it's an opportunity for them to showcase their mentor protege program in their perpetual arts initiatives. I used to be a protege of the Rolex mentor protege program years and years ago. And what they do at the beginning of the Biennale is that they would showcase the project that the protege worked on with their mentor during the course of a year or 2 years. So that was the primary sort of content they were looking to showcase in the pavilion. The other content was also that they had been designing or developing these new stores in other parts of the world, notably in Milan and in Tokyo, which were very much anchored in the idea of sustainability, but also in the idea of craft making expertise that is disappearing, nowadays. And there was really a symbiotic line of thought between my practice and this particular desire they had of showcasing these stores.
I love that they're even thinking about it.
Yes.
That's not a lot of places are kind of.
Well, to be honest, they were not only thinking about it, they were incredibly open to any direction in my. I was really grateful and very surprised that my approach to sustainability, which, like I said, is not necessarily a conventional approach to sustainability. And when I say a conventional approach, I'm thinking about sustainability in terms of metrics and carbon footprint and net zero, checklist and things of that nature. Is not at all how I think about sustainability. I think it's just one component, but it from my point of view is that it's not sufficient as a metric or as a way that we approach sustainability. And they were very much open to that, and I was talking about more sort of esoteric, almost, dimensions of sustainability, or sort of a bit softer, less sort of data driven um, elements. But the argument was that those actually feed into those more measured elements of footprint at the end of that tunnel. But what you get to do in the process is also contribute to other dimensions, such as social sustainability, economic sustainability, depend based on the process that would be put in place, and maybe even cultural sustainability. And those were dimensions, I was very much adamant on, making sure we explored through the project, and they were completely open to that.
Ah, kudos to Rolex. I mean, really,
Absolutely.
honestly, because I love that. So I'm going to go off the rails for a minute because I'm famous for that. So tell me about this. Tell me a little bit more about this unconventional approach to sustainability. I mean, you kind of described it a little bit there, but you just really quickly kind of fired off some things
Yes.
that people are. I work on projects all day, every day,
Mm,
that I don't hear people talking about things like economic sustainability and
yes.
cultural sustainability, and I would love to hear more about that.
Yes, of course. This, I think I stumbled on this almost accidentally, and I think it's sort of a byproduct of practicing on the African continent, where there's a huge amount of scarcity, and the question was always, how can you make more with less? How can you make incredible buildings that are energy efficient, for the simple reason that energy is incredibly expensive in most parts of the African continent. So, for very pragmatic reasons, how can you make architecture more affordable? Again, for the simple reason that when you make architecture that is following a sort of normative Western model, it tends to come at a premium in a place like that, where the materials involved would probably need to be imported. The technical skills required might also need to be imported in order to execute the project to the best of its ability. And so I started thinking about architecture fundamentally from in its inception from a construction point of view, and the construction implications of our choices, our material choices, the forms we make, all of those things, a very direct cost implication and sort of viability implication at the end of the day. So that led to developing a practice where I thought about sustainability through those different lenses, and realizing that when I look at it through an economic lens, through a cultural lens, through a material culture lens, it lends and it brings me sort of effortlessly to a really, really high level of environmental sustainability, actually. Because when we're talking about using materials that are local, for instance, which is one way of making buildings more affordable because you avoid transportation costs and import duties and things of that nature, and also you make the buildings more maintainable long term. So you're also thinking about the life cycle and the time the building needs to be able to operate effectively. All of a sudden, making a building that is affordable has a environmental benefit. The materials are often sourced from maybe 5 to 10 kilometers from of our site. At least that was the experience in Niger, or at the very least, nearby, or at least within the same country, which
Right.
is something that at this point in our globalized economy is almost unheard of, right? It's now really think about we just thinking about where we can source whatever material we've already designed into a project, rather than my approach, which is a reversed approach, where I first go and really excavate, all the different skills, materials, traditions that are present and inherent to a certain context, to figure out what the opportunities are from a design point of view. And I design based on those, so that by the time the building is designed, it can already be made with local skills, local materials, which inherently is what I called economic sustainability. Because you are empowering local workforces, you are empowering local skills and injecting funds back into a local economy before the building has even arrived. You have already provided a level of value, say, in the context. Um, and so that economic sustainability is incredibly important. But of course, then that means that you pollute less. You pollute less through your material choice, because it tends to be a natural material that is, inherent to that geography. Um, and you've provided work for people who are there locally. And that also translates into a certain level of sustainability, because usually when we look at local skills and local materials, that means that they have a certain history in that context of being used a certain way. And it makes it also easier to find local collaborators, who could be involved. So that is tied to this notion of economic sustainability.
Okay, you need to go talk to everybody in the industry because
No, but I
I've
mean, I
done
think
I've done
what
some
was incredible.
interviews. Go ahead.
Yes, please go ahead. Now, I
Oh,
was just going to say, what was incredible was to realize actually how easy such a simple principle, such a simple way of looking at it, how easily it can be adapted to any context, regardless of where you are in the world, and how something that we developed for the African context brings a huge amount of value anywhere in the world.
well, and that's what I was thinking is like I've done some interviews on projects in all kinds of places in the world, and some places where uh, the local community.
Mm.
One that pops into my mind was a rammed earth project in Nigeria.
Right.
Um, the workforce that they would have available to them um, would not have been familiar with materials that maybe we would use here, or to know
Exactly.
know what to do, and the whole process of construction is totally different. And so by making this rammed earth project and doing it with materials they were familiar with, there were so many benefits. And
Exactly.
and there's no reason that kind of mindset can't be applied to any project. But that's not typically how we approach a project.
Yeah, I think unfortunately, because architecture and materials have become so convenient and everything is inside of a catalog, I think our field perhaps maybe has turned into almost a shopping list, of being able to imagine and bring to life anything you can, that your mind can conjure up. And you can open a catalog, and or pick up your phone and find a supplier for it, and that's fine. But I think in doing so, we have done incredible damage or contributed incredible damage to the planet. I mean, just thinking about the fact that the construction industry is responsible for at least 40% of the pollution on our planet. We like to think about the oil industry and cars and all of those things as being the main culprits. We actually might be a bigger culprit than all of them, if right, because we also, as part of our processes, um, consume a huge amount of oil in transportation, in creation of industrialized materials. Something A material like concrete is incredibly, I mean, we all know how terrible it is for the planet, right? So I think it's also about, as practitioners, as architects, really um, taking the measure of our responsibility. These are decisions that we make. These are often not necessarily mandated by the client. So to fulfill our visions, I think there's a sort of certain level of accountability also that is necessary.
Well, I couldn't agree more. And there's some things you said that I never really thought about from that point of view, like as you were talking about sourcing materials locally. So even if you're going to open the catalog and get something, why not try to get it from the city you're in instead of one state over or halfway across the country, or just making that extra effort? Can I get this right here and support the local economy and
Exactly.
save just by, like you said, transportation and all the different ways that we can save, or be more sustainable by not having to ship something from somewhere. There are even small ways we can improve by taking the time to
Absolutely.
kind of think of it in that reverse order. So I'm going to be sharing. I'm going to be sharing this. I'm going to be extra sharing this interview. Okay, now that I've gone down my rabbit hole, let's get back to this pavilion. So I usually work my way from the outside in. I'm not going to ask you the question about the site because I already know you had a very well-defined pad you had to do this with. So we'll just skip right over that and go to the exterior design of this building. So particularly the glass and the wood. Tell me about your enclosure design for this facility and what all is going on there and the materials you used, and
Yeah.
just give me the rundown on that.
Yeah, I mean, it was sort of, I think by the time we worked on this project, it was very easy to lend to these materials because, again, now have a systematized way of researching um, before we embark on a project. And so it started with me spending a few days in Venice with a list of um, traditional makers that I just decided to just go around and visit in their workshops. First, we were looking through all the different practices that are really much entrenched in Venice. So it's glassmaking, of course, is comes first and foremost. Woodworking, um, ceramics, all kinds of different practices, and singling out the ones that we thought would be useful, for a pavilion, and then just going through and spending, hours with these incredibly open and generous with their time, makers and practitioners in the city who welcomed me in their workshops and sort of walked me through their processes because that is very important. The thinking and design process to really understand actually how, even down to the kinds of tools they have available. So that once I'm imagining um, different designs, I can tell right away who can make them based on the people I met and interviewed and the kinds of practices I witnessed. So that's how it started, and came down to wood and glass quite quickly. I mean, glass was a given, definitely because it was Venice. I hesitated between stone and wood at some point, but it being a pavilion, wood was just much more practical. And at the beginning, I was very much interested in. I discovered that a lot of the rotten bricolets, and they call, those pillars that are inside the lagoon, were being repurposed by some of the practitioners I spoke to who were turning that were turning them into, other sort of artistic. Um, and I thought that would be incredible to be able to use that as cladding material, actually. And for the longest time, that's what we were going to use. Because this is essentially discarded material, and we were going to sort of sand it, shape and turn it into this facade, this wood facade. Unfortunately, that ended up costing 3 times more
Oh,
than
oh,
even sourcing new wood. So we went back forward and discovered um, a company who did sort of this incredible work of cataloging and storing materials from dismantled or sort of damaged buildings um, in Venice. And they happen to have these massive, really long span wooden beams from old palaces, of Venice. And it was just sort of this light bulb moment, and we just thought, "This is what we need to use," and the price was right also for using that, and the same company could shape them in the forms we wanted, and do all the work themselves, and they were based in Venice, and it was sort of, perfect. So that
win,
kind of,
win, win.
exactly checked the box for the wood, but similarly for the glass, the glass was problematic because choosing a glass maker was the biggest issue. There's so many of them. They're so incredibly talented. It was sort of painful. It was a painful process, but in the end, we went with Vistosi because they had a sort of controlled environment that was very useful to create sort of standardized pieces, and they already had a working relationship with Rolex, and they already were very familiar with the level of quality that would be required, et cetera, et cetera. So it just sort of made it easy from that point of view, and time was very short. So they were the perfect partner to help us streamline the process of the glass that ended up being in the project as well.
So that's a great lead into the. I love now that I know that pavilion's built out of wood from palaces. That just makes it
Yes.
all the more special in my mind.
The way
So
I like to think about it is
yeah.
that some of those would 200 years old. So for me, this pavilion is actually an antique. It's a 200-year-old antique that we made anew, and I love that idea.
I love that idea. So I've actually been to Venice and even went to probably just a touristy glassmaker and brought some glass home. But I have seen the incredible work
Yes.
that these masters
Hmm.
create. What was it like working with Venetian the particularly Vitosi, the Venetian glass
Oh.
masters? I mean, I'd find that horribly intimidating.
But they were so, because it's a family business also, they're so incredibly open. I spent a lot of time in their factory, which I'm calling it a factory because it's very standardized, but everything is done by hand. The glass is blown by hand. It was just sort of absolutely amazing to watch them work. And it was quite effortless, I have to say. They were, and with every artisan and maker we worked with, they all were very excited. They love what they do. They were so about what they do. It was not, none of them approached their craft like a business per se. They were, we all became nerds together collectively, it's just sort of trying out different ideas, and this is also what I cherish. And that was one of the pleasant surprises for me, because when I work on the continent, it was always very much like that, working with other makers and practitioners, and they would get very excited because all of a sudden we are making things that they know how to make, but they've never quite made in that form before, and they would get super involved in trying to solve it and to figure out how to design, how to create the thing we designed. um, and it would be incredibly fruitful, but most importantly, just a very sort of excited energy. And it was the exact same energy in Venice, so that was also incredible to realize how universal this was, because at the end of the day, it was really about a conversation. All of the conversations were about their craft. My design is one thing, but what I was really interested in was what they were making and how they were making it. And we could just speak for hours, about the different processes we would employ. And when we started prototype, oh, there was just so many back and forth. We would receive these material samples in our New York office, in 24 hours, and then we would get on a Zoom call. It was there was just something incredibly liberating, also about that process.
You think they'll send me some material samples? I just want some of that glass.
We can, if are you in New York? I
No,
can
no.
send you. I can send you a piece of. We have
I'm on
many.
the West Coast. I'm in Portland, Oregon. I am really
Oh,
far away
that's
from you.
lovely.
Yeah,
That's
I love it
amazing.
here.
My old neck of the woods. I lived in
Oh,
Seattle
oh, okay.
for 8 years.
Yeah, my
Yeah,
youngest son lives in Seattle. Well, you're welcome to
wonderful.
come visit anytime. Um,
Absolutely.
so this glass is really unconventional compared to how, like, I'm specifying glass for a project.
Mhm.
How did you approach from a design standpoint, your drawings and in your design? How did you approach that in your design to accommodate such a
Mhm.
unique special thing?
I was inspired by some of the things I saw in the workshops. And this is why this kind of preliminary research is so important, and why I don't pick up a pencil until I've done this research. So I started seeing, it started with the texture of the glass, sort of kind of the dapple surface of the glass, sort of started making me think about light and how the light would, you know, um, shine through it. At that point, I did not think that I would make a roof out of the glass. I was just sort of letting it through. But the dappled nature of the glass is what led me to want to use it as a roof element. Because one of the things from the site um, is that while it's sort of this little space, on this platform, it had these mature trees all around it that created this incredible canopy. And I remember standing there and looking up at the trees and watching the light filter through the trees. And so when I was in Vistosi's offices, they had glass samples that had this sort of same dappled nature. And that's where that idea came from, to some extent.
Just such a different journey. Uh, what would you say were the key sustainable? We already know the wood. I mean, I don't know if
Yes,
you can get more sustainable than that. The key sustainable features of this pavilion.
everything. So the wood,
I
to
love
your
that.
point, all of the wood, the glass by default, can be transformed at will. It can be melted back down, make new glass. So it's sustainable from that point of view, and it's sustainable because it's being sourced literally just from right across the lagoon, and fabricated there. So that's also the other layer. And when we started thinking about the floor, for example, I was very much interested in making terrazzo tiles, and I wanted to embed glass in terrazzo tiles. So then we found um, just basically discarded glass that these manufacturers were melting back down. It was basically trash that they melted back down, added pigment in, and created these massive shards that could then be used to make objects. A lot of artists use them. A lot of the glass that you might buy in Murano that is very colorful embed some of that glass. And so I just decided to have it crushed and turned into aggregate for our terrazzo. And we had to go through many different, samples, and different tries, but it worked out. So that was also sort of repurposing essentially unwanted material into, this incredible tradition, going back to cultural sustainability, tradition of terrazzo, making in Venice. And then we had to design a metal frame because the glass was so incredibly heavy that we had to have a pretty robust armature to hold it up. But the metal, we made sure was recycled metal, and that it could be dismantled and recyclable. So nothing is soldered in; everything is bolted in the pavilion so that it can be dismantled and reused. So one of the conversations we had, even with the contractor, who is also a furniture maker, so that inspired another sustainability idea where I designed the different pieces in such a way that they can be dismantled, so the individual glass discs can just be detached, and they can become tabletops. They can become, all kinds of different objects, later on. Say similarly for the wood, it can also be dismantled and detached, cut to different shapes. It can end up becoming new surfaces for credenzas, for, table legs, all kinds of different things. So I also designed the individual pieces and sort of how the pavilion would come together by thinking through also how it would be dismantled and how it could be repurposed.
So basically, this entire project is sustainable.
It's sustainable, exactly.
That is amazing. That is what a fun project to get to work on.
Oh, it was such a joy. It was such a joy. But also I think it was nice because we had been doing that for 10 years already, back then. So, this had become this way of working has become a well-oiled machine, right? Um, but it was just sort of incredibly fun to do with a new set of people and in a completely new, geography with new materials than what we normally are accustomed to. No, it was absolutely incredible and very satisfying.
There's so much thinking outside the box. I don't think there was a box on this project. I truly don't. I mean, there's just every time something comes out of your mouth, I'm going, ah, genius, genius. Yeah, you need to talk to everybody. Uh,
Thank you.
I don't, or at least at the time, I can't remember now. At the time I wrote this script, I didn't have any photos of the interior of the
Mhm.
pavilion. So describe for me the interior spaces and aesthetic on the inside.
Yeah. I mean, the pavilion is formed as basically two different pieces that interlock. Um, and that's inspired actually from the aerial view of Venice, which looks like two hands that are sort of interlaced together and sort of divided by the Grand Canal in that way. So the pavilion comes together as these two pieces that are kind of almost triangular, that come together to make one continuous space. And sort of the circulation, then it's sort of like the Grand Canal, in a way. So it's a little bit cheesy, from that point of view. But I thought it was, and I thought it actually worked quite well from a spatial organization point of view, because what those two different pieces allowed me to do was actually very simply programmatic separation. So I could create a zone for the Rolex content related to the stores and the exhibition for the stores, and a zone related to the exhibition, architectural proteges whose work was going to be showcased in the pavilion as well. So it was really sort of from a purely functional, pragmatic point of view, as well as being sort of this tongue-in-cheek nod at the plan of Venice. And so when you're inside, because the project has this incredible glass ceiling, all the natural light, is coming through the glass ceiling, which allowed me to create a complete opaque skin all around, because I was very much interested in creating an immersive experience. So when you enter, you're surrounded by the wood, that continues inside, and you have this dappled light that's filtering through the ceiling, which is completely um, sort of colored um, discs from beginning to end, everywhere, which obviously then colors the interior, with this kind of like slight green tinge. But depending on the time of day, depending on whether it's a sunny day or overcast, the atmosphere is completely different. And it ended up being also, and this I did not intend, but I was very satisfied to witness it when I was on site. It was a refuge because I made sure that there was also seating inside. Because one of my frustrations in the previous pavilion was that there was no place to sit. There was seating inside because there was a lot of video content also to absorb. So I witnessed that because the Biennale can be quite overwhelming. There's so many people, so many exhibitions. People started going into the pavilion almost as a point of a place of respite. So they would sit there, they would walk around, but then they would at some point sit there. They're just on their phone or they're going through some brochure. They would go outside, sit on the steps we have outside the pavilion, and then go back in again. And several people mentioned this to me also, having visited it, how people would go in and out, back and forth in the pavilion, but it would also linger. And I think for pavilions, that's something that you don't necessarily get, the lingering. You enter, content the exhibitions, and you continue to on to the next pavilion. Um, so my only intent had been to create this immersive, experience, and to also dampen noise with the wood. The wood was very, very successfully did that. But I did not think about the psychological impact actually of being overwhelmed by the Biennale, and how that could be something of a refuge from the chaos.
Well, and what a great lesson learned for future projects.
Absolutely.
Because I don't think I would have thought about that either.
Yeah, I didn't think about it.
I might have
I
thought
just
about,
watched it.
yeah, might have thought
Yeah.
about seating, just maybe
Mhm.
for like older people or something.
Yeah.
But I
Or
wouldn't have
also the
thought about
host,
it.
but you also have the people who are hosting, and who have to stand all day long in the pavilion. And that's that's really difficult.
Yeah. Well, and
Yeah,
what a great way also for Rolex to get
exactly.
somebody to spend a little bit more time looking at what's going on there. I mean,
Yeah,
it's you
absolutely.
can equate it to like going to Disneyland with little kids.
Mhm.
You're going to burn out if you don't have a place to stop and just
And
rest
just
for a
be.
while and soak in what's
Exactly.
around you. But they,
Yeah.
at Disneyland, there's all kinds of things around you to still look at. Not anywhere near as cool as what you're describing, but they are some of the best people on the planet at moving
Mhm.
people in the way they want to move them. Um,
Absolutely.
so
Yeah.
I would love that. What would you say there's so many cool things going on here, but what would you say your biggest design challenge was on this project and how did you solve it? I love to hear how people solved the hard things. The easy things are easy, but the hard things are a little different.
Um, I think I don't think there was a design challenge per se, to be honest, because a lot of the design ideas were born of either the place or the people I encountered and the practices I encountered. So they were just association of ideas that happened sort of effortlessly. And again, and that's why I find this process so valuable, because it was so anchored in who will end up making it, and in what it was, inherently from a material point of view, that many things just sort of fell into place. I think the only challenge, which was not that big of a challenge, was just more of an annoyance, was the amount of metal that we had to use for the armature of the pavilion. That was unsatisfying for me. Let's put it that way. Um, just to support the sheer weight of the glass, right? But I also did not want to compromise, on that glass. So, sort of I had to make a choice from that point of view. But we were also working, and again, this goes back to what it means to collaborate with local intelligences. You know, things happen quite easily because of it. Because otherwise, what we're doing is we're designing a project, we're deciding what's going to be on it, then we're hoping we can find someone who can execute it the way we want to. And we have a lot of headache, controlling and going over the things that are not quite the way we meant them to be, etc. And because this was not something that I could afford to do again when I was building, or when I'm building on the continent, because again the skills are not the same, I had to develop a system where things could happen very easily, and where construction would be as uneventful as possible, and where construction could be as straightforward as possible. That also meant designing in a incredibly restrained manner. How can you create beauty and functionality, and sort of even adventure, sometimes, but turn it into a system that can be dumbed down and that could be easily put together. And I did the same thing, for this project. And again, because the people putting it together are the local experts, it just, they could do this with their eyes closed. We didn't have to worry about if the glass was going to come out, the way we wanted. We didn't have to worry about whether the wood was going to be, sort of cut and planed the way we wanted. We didn't have to worry about whether the contractor was going to be able to put together this design properly, because also the contractor, just like us, was a big believer in process. We had a one-to-one mock-ups of the pavilion before we actually went on site. So when we went on site, it just came together in weeks, very quickly. So I think it's
I,
about systems.
I'm really fascinated about, because I've been around a while, more years than I'm going to admit to. Um, and I'm really fascinated. Yeah, I watched I'm not an architect, but I've watched architects around me designing buildings for years, and they're sketching things out sometimes before they've even got a real clue of what material they want to use or
Yeah.
how it's going to be made. And so,
Mm,
and as well as I do, there's so much rework and rework and rework and
exactly.
kind of doing your process in reverse,
Mhm.
and in deciding what material you want to use, and go doing that homework first and then putting pencil to paper, so to speak. Not that anybody's doing that anymore, but it's just a concept that I think needs a lot more attention, because
Well,
it
I think
it you can be so much more precise if you know exactly what you're doing.
exactly. You know, and
Oh,
I'm telling you that the level of streamlining, and you can actually, it frees you to focus on design, ironically, because I think it can be seen as a kind of getting in the way of your creative, expression. But for me, I like the limitation. It's self-imposed, but I like the boundaries that are placed by doing it this way. Because otherwise, I mean, of course you can, the imagination is limitless. You can conjure up any, concept and any designs. That's not hard. But the boundaries, I think, are so productive, or can be so productive, but also can allow you to put in place systems that, you know, streamline projects. And this is something that we just, I know we're not talking about, other projects necessarily, but we just tested this same process here in New York. We just finished a project where we did the exact same thing. And again, it happened very quickly. Everything was local, even in New York. And it just came together beautifully, because you involve, I'm not interested in being heroic as an architect. where I have to solve every single problem and everything has to be coming out of my brain. I truly value and cherish collaboration. And I like to meet people who are incredibly talented and more talented than me at what they do. And finding these makers who, again, the level of intelligence in their mind, in their fingertips about their craft and what they do is unparalleled. There's nothing I can imagine that can surpass that. And so for me, I love the moments where I remove myself and I say, I would like something that is sort of like this. I'm having a hard time because I know this is something you can do through your skill. But for example, if we're talking about a certain detail, I would propose a detail, but I also listen to maybe there's something from 20 years ago that they happen to design for some project, that comes to their mind. And again, developing these relationships from the beginning helps you get to that. So that I'm not looking through some kind of, magazine or detail and say, oh, I love this detail. I'm going to apply this detail. Yes, of course, we can do that. But I find it so cool when we can have that conversation about, this is what I think this detail should be. And you can actually reveal to me something that no magazine, can show me that exists inside of your psyche that you encountered at a turn of, an experience someday. And then now all of a sudden it's part of the project.
That's an amazing mindset, and it shows a very high level of emotional intelligence, which I also think we could use a lot more of in this industry. But every project's going to give you boundaries anyway.
Yes,
There's going to be
exactly.
project budget, timelines, whatever. So you can let the project set your boundaries, or you can set your own.
Exactly.
Um,
And I
so
never see boundaries as a limitation, because
no,
again, you're talking about project budget, budget always been the biggest thing for me. I respect budgets greatly. Um, I don't see, an issue with a client, having a small budget. I don't see that as it meaning that therefore I cannot make great architecture or that I cannot, you know, play around, with the architecture or with the design. I don't necessarily think they're related, to be honest. I think good design is good design and it's not budget dependent.
um, what would you say your favorite part of the whole process of this project? What would you say your favorite part of all of it was?
I'm sure you won't be surprised to hear that it's the process of working and patient, you know. Um, the building when it's finished is just sort of the conclusion. For me, that's never the end goal. It's just the conclusion, it's the end of the process. But the whole thing matters from the minute we start researching all the way to the building delivery. To me, that is the architecture. It's not the building alone, it's the whole thing. Because again, with this approach we have, because we inject back in the local, ecosystem, then that means that that is also the project. And I find that incredibly important. The idea that a project is not just a building, it's also the constellation of people, the constellation of skills and know-how, the lives that have been shaped by it, especially if you again embed it in a local community. Then, if it's not anchored in the community, then that cannot be part of the project by default. But when it's anchored in the community, that then encounters this project as part of their life, then the whole process is the project, and I
Well,
love
and
that.
I would also imagine that the community looks at that building a different way than just the building, because there's heart and hands from that community that went into getting it there in that process. And so there's probably a different mindset about ownership or care of that building
Well,
than just some new high rise that went up, you know.
and I think also the other aspect of it is that, because the people we collaborate with are specialists, right? So it's also not the kind of community involvement that we think of often where, especially in the so-called global south, when we're thinking that, we should encourage people to build themselves, or something like that. these are experts, and I think expertise is something that should be respected. And what I always imagine is also the experts whose hands made, certain aspects of these buildings also being acknowledged by the people using, that project, right? So in the Rolex Pavilion, one thing that I really insisted on is that we document the process of the work, and we turned it into a film that is screened on the hour, every hour in the pavilion. So when you sit, you will encounter it. That is important. That's also part of the project from my point of view. So we could actually hear in their own words, what their craft means to them, what they thought of the process of working through this project specifically, what they found challenging, what they found less challenging. There was just sort of a certain amount of also like the pride would shine through, in the work they were doing, and it being giving space and place to express itself.
What I think we learn something from every project we do.
Yes.
What was your biggest lesson learned, or what did you learn from this project that made you a better architect for the next project you took on? What lesson did this project give you?
Hmm. It's related to everything that I said and that I just said. I think it was sort of what it did. It allowed me to really generalize this approach. I think it was a lot more specific before, um, a lot more sort of anchored to a certain part of the world, and working through this project. And it wasn't the first time I was going through this process outside of the continent, but I think it was the first time I was able to do it because the project was small at such an intimate level, and I was able to do it from every single point of view. So it became a laboratory for these ideas, for refining these ideas, and for really strengthening them and clarifying them even for myself.
So you think that you'll, now that you've kind of had this intimate experience, that you will apply some of that to some of these bigger
I already have.
projects? Oh, of course you
I
have.
already have.
I don't know why I don't even know why I asked such a stupid question. I have, of course you have. Before we get to our two closing questions, tell me
Hmm.
what Mariam Issoufou is working on now that I get to call you about later, because I'm going to be looking for you to come back on the show.
Oh,
What are
I
you
would love
working
that.
on now that we're going to see in the future?
I mean, we're working on so many really, really cool things that are sort of in the infancy right now. But one thing that, I mean, two projects that I'm really excited about are under construction. One of them just finished, as I was saying, the project in New York. The other one is under construction. The project in New York is, again, kind of like the Venice Pavilion to some extent, but it's a restaurant. And it's a restaurant in Soho. And we just finished the construction. It's going to open up next month. And what is special about that project is that we, like I said, we're a local builder to put it together, but it was also a design build firm, which meant because we literally had a client who came to us and told us that he wanted a restaurant in 3 months from design to construction. Um, I should have said no to, but which I took the challenge because the project was so important. Story of the project was incredible, which is incredibly unusual for a restaurant space. What makes it special is that this is a cafe. It was a cafe that was attached to a huge industrial kitchen, which turned out to be the largest soup kitchen in New York, which is running the largest soup kitchen in New York, churning out 30,000 meals per week for people in need in New York. And one of the board members of this organization called Rethink Food. Um, and what they do is that they collaborate with big restaurants, Michelin star restaurants, all kinds of different, who give them a lot of their surplus, of food, and they make these meals, with them. One of the co-founders is Daniel Bloom, um, and one of the board members thought that it would be incredible to turn this cafe into a supper club, a very high-end supper club, and the proceeds would go towards the soup kitchen. So obviously I had to do this project, regardless of the fact that we just had 3 months, to do it. We did not succeed in doing it in 3 months, but we did do it in 4 months. So I'm still quite proud of that. But what's nice about the project is that, not only does it come with this mission, right? But we were able to make everything New York centric. We went through the same, research we go through, excavated sort of the history of this site, which turned out to be, it used to be called Little Africa. It was actually at the edge of it's along Houston Street, in Soho, and it was the first settled Black neighborhood for newly freed slaves that were moving into Manhattan. And it was sort of next door to some of really kind of wonderful establishments, African Americans who were building a life, and society for themselves. There were private clubs, and all kinds of different things, in that area. And so this building was also heritage protected, because of that. So there was also this incredible story embedded and layered, and we discovered just 2 blocks down was um a, a, a private club, the first private club that was African American in New York, called the Black and Tan. And that became sort of one of the things that anchored the project. So inside the project is dark, almost black. And then, the Black and Tan motif comes back. But it was incredible because again, the client was very open to all the different ideas we would have, and this process that we have of working, this research we do in order to kind of fuse that back into the project. So the materials were sourced around New York. We designed all the furniture as well, and the design build firm also happens to be able to make furniture. So obviously, we wanted them to make the furniture. They made the restaurant. They made the furniture. They sourced the material. They shared our ethos of wanting to really stay as local as possible, and took great pains in finding, our table is travertine and marble. So these are not, um, these are serious materials, and we were able to find suppliers nearby. They made the furniture themselves and then reuse. They were sort of interested in our ideas of sustainability, and so they took also all of the leftover material from CNC routing and cutting out. I think that the wood for our chairs, and turned that as a gift back to the restaurant into these sort of snack platers, wood snack platers that were just incredibly beautiful. So that kind of mindset also ended up infecting everybody involved in the project. We have artwork, from local New York artists in the space, but also the all the ceramic and the cups and all of that are by this incredibly talented African American ceramist who lives in Harlem, like who did. So there are all these layers that are embedded in the project. And on top of that, it was sort of an opportunity for me to have a whole introspection about, because they wanted just kind of a communal table, because it's a space for only 14 people as a supper club. And I interrogated this idea of the table, like what is this table? And is it actually communal? Um, I see it as very hierarchical, actually, by nature. So reinterpreting also what a communal table looked like. So which led us to make all the furniture. So redesigned. It's a new kind of table. It's not a rectangle at all. It's something else. Um, yeah, and so it was incredibly fun. So I'm very much looking forward to that. And the other project is as far removed from this as possible in scale and typology, and it is in the UAE, and it's this massive development. It was our first developer project that we designed about 3 years ago, 4 years ago, and it's over 2,000 homes in Sharjah that are currently under construction. It's a community we designed, where we designed every single home. We made the master plan, um, we designed the mosque, the houses, 7 different homes, 7 different home types. The lifestyle center, kind of like um, mall/retail center of the development. So it's one of those things where the entire office was working on that project, at the same time. And it's been under construction for a year, and we're starting to see the end of the tunnel in the next couple of years, essentially. So that's been very exciting because um, it's in the UAE, but it's also a development that is mixed income, which is very unusual. So it had everything from 2-bedroom townhomes to 7-bedroom luxury villas with a pool. And we had the opportunity to design every single one of those experiences. So yeah, right now those are the two projects I'm really thinking about because they're coming to life. I was in Sharjah a few months ago, and I was able to actually be on the construction site and see them, see these homes um, coming out. It was incredibly gratifying.
Uh, Lady, I don't know when you sleep.
I
Um,
don't, I don't. It's
you
one of the
don't.
problems. I'm
Yeah.
working on it. I'm working
Yeah.
on it.
So before I get to my two closing questions, real quick, I have to ask you the design build and I want to hear about that restaurant. So I'm going to have somebody calling you to bug you. Um,
Yes,
the, can I ask who the design build firm is?
yes. They are actually. Oh, hold on. Sorry. They are twin brothers based in New York, and it turns out they're originally from Egypt, actually, and they are big design nerds, and they do everything from um, schools to playgrounds to retail spaces, in Manhattan. And hold on, let me get you the name of the firm.
I'm just curious because I interviewed a firm that redid a hotel bar
Mm,
in New York.
yeah,
They're a design build firm, and they did a bunch of the furniture and wall coverings and things. And I was just wondering if it was
maybe
the same
it's
firm.
them. Hold on, because I always get confused, so I don't want to say it wrong
No,
because
that's totally fine.
it's like T2. Hold on. Because the thing is, we never use their firm name. We just call them the twins.
The twins. Call the
Every time we
twins.
talk about it, we
Well,
just say the
I
twins.
don't. It may be a different firm because I don't recall my
It's.
previous interview.
I was gonna. No, no, no. It's fine. It's just because I was gonna say T2WM, and I was like, no, I'm gonna get it wrong. It's two T TW2M.
Okay,
I
not
just
not the
always like
same firm. Okay,
yeah,
so
TW2M.
we always close every episode with two questions. One being a broader industry question, and then our final question we ask everybody on the show.
Mm,
So I love getting an opportunity to talk to architects who work in more than one country,
mm,
not just in the US. Different countries have different rules for design and buildings and different
yes.
economic environments and all kinds of different
Hmm.
things. What advice would you offer a younger architect coming up behind you
Hmm.
on best practices and the most important things to consider when you're approaching and working in a new country?
Mm. I love that question. Thank you. I love it also because it's something that concerns me. One thing that concerns me from an architectural practice point of view is that sometimes when we go to other places, we just import ourselves into those places. Um, and that can be fine, but that can also have some really sort of negative consequences on the context because architecture is never neutral, right? My advice would be to sort of take a back seat for a little bit of time when you actually enter that space to soak up as much as you can, um, and to learn from people who are actually operating from that space rather than seeing yourself as the expert that has come into this space. I think, of course, this is important, as sort of like a humility, measure. But actually, I think it leads us to better and maybe even richer design. Because for better or for worse, I think architecture and architecture education has a very sort of uh, unique and sort of specific point of view, um, and specific ways of thinking about things and doing things. So I see going to another geography as an opportunity to not only challenge that, but add new tools to your arsenal, I would say. There
You
is
should be a
always the opportunity for that.
you should be a politician too, because
Should I?
you just very nicely said, "Hey, architects, put your ego to the side and figure out how they
Yeah,
live, not how you can come save them." But
correct.
it's I think that's good advice for any project, no matter where you're doing it. Yeah,
Absolutely.
remembering that while you have the skills to give them what they need, you have to know what they
Yeah.
need, how they
But
live,
also,
how they operate in that space.
yeah, and there's such an incredible richness, you know, everywhere. Because which we've kind of flattened, by making this globalized architecture, which is so unfortunate because it's so impoverishing. Um, from a design and from an imagination point of view. Actually
Yeah,
opening yourself up to other ways, um, learning from other ways, from older ways, also is something that I find incredibly important as as an inspiration source, as a grounding um, sort of practice. Um, because at the end of the day, as much as we like to feel like we're inventing new things, we never invent anything. You know, technology is amazing and we should harness it for everything that it has to offer. But many problems that we try to solve, in an innovative manner have already been solved before. And sometimes we just kind of have to get over ourselves.
yeah, I I would agree with you. Final question, everybody and I sarcastically joke this is the easiest question of the day because it's probably the hardest
Mm,
one. Um, and it doesn't have to be one thing, but I like to believe that every one of us is trying to live a life that leaves some kind of contribution to make the world a better place. Now, that might not be on a global or global scale, might just be to somebody you mentor, or, there's a lot of ways to make an impact on the world,
mm.
professional or personal. So, for you, personal or professional, what do you hope your impact will be, or one of your impacts? My guess is you have a whole list.
Um, so I actually don't have a list. It's more of a point of view, I would say, and it's the point of view that I've largely shared over this hour that we've been talking. I grew up in a part of the world um, that is considered, and I say considered, one of the poorest, um, that was colonized and shaped by that colonization, that was at times even designed by someone else. And I think what that did was sort of um, give me a drive to approach architecture or frankly life in general in the things I think about from sort of a deep design for equity, respect, dignity. Because when you grow up where I grew up, those are the things that are consistently stripped off of you. At least you always feel forces that are stripping that off of you, either because they're defining you, they're explaining you, they're showing you. Um, there's very little agency, at least that you feel you can have. And all I hope is make a contribution towards, you know, thinking through ways in which you can reclaim agency, reclaim dignity. And this is, again, I think something that's very universal. And coming from where I come from made me very sensitive to that. But I think actually this is something that you can feel in New York and you can feel, yeah, in London or in Beijing. These are emotions that as human beings, these are realities that we often encounter. It's just that where I come from, it's like at a very kind of systemic level. But to your point, this is something that you can feel also on the individual level. I find that incredibly important. And all I hope is to be able to contribute towards, solutions that take us in a different direction and solutions that empower and dignify. And if I'm able to do that, then I can rest in peace.
You literally almost made me cry with that answer. I'm not joking. I'm sitting there going, "Don't start crying. Don't start crying."
Oh,
That might be my 158 episodes we've recorded yet, and I think that is my most favorite answer, head and shoulders,
thank you.
to that question. I'm going to steal it from you, and
Please feel
I'm
free because
gonna
I
join the
think
movement.
please do, please do.
Mariam, this has been one of the most delightful interviews I've ever had. Please, you don't even need an
Yeah.
invitation. Just send
Okay,
me
good.
an email and say, "Hey, Cherise, you want to talk about this?" And
Yes, I
my
will.
door is open. I would love to have you back anytime. Congratulations on this
Thank you.
incredible project, and we'll be
Thank you.
talking to you soon.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Cherise. This was absolutely a delightful conversation.